We've got some Big Ten betrayal as one of the best coordinators in college football is going from Buckeye Land to central Pennsylvania. And I've got my way too early Big Ten power rankings. I think you know what time it is. Let's do this, Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Welcome to a Monday, January 27th, 2025 edition of Big Nation. Before we really get going here on today's program, want to send a big congratulations out to the Big Ten NFL alumni that are advancing to the Super Bowl in New Orleans in just a couple of weeks. How about former Wisconsin linebacker Leo Chanel for the Kansas City Chiefs? You've got George Karlaftis coming off the edge for old KC as well. And you can't talk about Big Ten NFL alumni advancing to the Super Bowl without talking about Saquon Barkley. This guy, when his NFL career is said and done, and he ain't leaving Philly anytime soon, he is going to be an absolute legend in the state of Pennsylvania. Of course, he was a huge part, maybe the part of that 2016 Penn State Big Ten championship team over there. Boy, Philadelphia, they just keep on running the football, and they're kind of going up against the norm, right? You got all these great quarterbacks in the NFL. It's become a quarterback-driven league, passing league. Philadelphia says, oh yeah, now we're going to go against the grain and just run it down your damn throat. And I love seeing it. My Big Ten heart within me really loves seeing it. All right, let's dive into the program and let's talk about that Big Ten betrayal. Speaking of the state of Pennsylvania, Jim Knowles is leaving his defensive coordinator spot of the Ohio State Buckeyes for that same position, to fill the position that Tom Allen left when he became the defensive coordinator over at Clemson. This continues to reflect just how invested Penn State is in the 2025 season. I talked about it on a show a week or 2 weeks ago of all of the talent that is returning. The Allers, the Singletons, the Katron Allens, the Denai Dennis Suttons, the Zakee Wheatleys, all of these guys that are running it back. Boy, this team is following in the same blueprint that Michigan in 2023 and Ohio State in 2024 really left for them to figure out how to build a national championship caliber team within the Big Ten Conference. I think that this is a higher jumping off point, certainly for Knowles at Penn State in 2025 than he had at Ohio State in 2022. Remember the year before that, you had what Oregon and CJ Verdell were able to do to that Ohio State team early in the season, really running it right at them. And you saw what Michigan was able to do that season. That was their first win in a very, very long time against the Ohio State Buckeyes. But you look at this Penn State defense right now for Jim Knowles, and you look at the track record that they've had the last few years. This is one of the best defensive teams in college football. And I think Jim Knowles has a lot of toys to play with, certainly. And I think he's going to take this defense, which is already really good to great, and I think this is going to be one of the top defenses in college football, no question, especially with Jim Knowles heading up this defense certainly right now. It's going to be ultra fun to watch, to see what he can do. When I talked about the financial part of this as well, he is set to average just over $3 million per year, a 3-year deal over the $9 million mark. We talked about that investment before, and that is big. That's kind of how you build a national championship team here in the 2020s here now. And I will say this quickly to wrap up, because to be honest with you, there's not a ton of hot takes that are going to be thrown around. You got a really good defensive coach stepping into a really good situation where you look at Brent Pry went on to be a head coach. You look at Manny Diaz went on to be a head coach, and Tom Allen had a really successful year last year. So really good coach, really good personnel, really good team. You're going to have an elite defense. Really, there's not much really else to say, certainly besides that. But I will say this. Be aware, other teams in the Big Ten. Be aware, other teams in college football. If you've got a really good defensive coach that you like, that Columbus cash might be knocking on the door pretty darn soon. And there are rumors out there that Chip Kelly could be a leading candidate for an NFL offensive coordinator job. So Ohio State, this is what happens when you win a national championship. This is what happens when you have the success that the Ohio State Buckeyes had this season. You're going to lose your coordinators. Nick Saban had to go through it every single year. So it is very much a restock and reload year upcoming in Columbus in 2025. All right, guys, they got me. Been seeing a lot of these way too early top 25s, and I don't get as worked up as some people do. Look, it's a lot of fun. We got a long way to go, man. This is a long off season. We got to have things to kind of get us through the Januaries, get us through the Februaries, to have these lists, to have this conjecture back and forth, I think is some healthy discussion, but it is also a fun look at where teams could be in 2025. So don't take this ultra seriously, I would say, as, hey, he's going to think this team's going to finish ninth in the Big Ten next year. Just like don't take these On3 and ESPN and 247 national top 25s ultra seriously. It's a fun look at where teams could be entering the next season, because now everybody's got their eyes on 2025. We're going to do this in groups, 4 teams here, 5 teams here, and kind of talk about each one of these groups. Let's start with the bottom 5 in my way too early Big Ten power rankings for the year 2025. Man, it's really hard not to put Purdue at the bottom. This is the only program in the Big Ten Conference that fired their head coach, that has a new head coach coming in as of now. Of course, that being Barry Odom taking over for Ryan Walters for the Boilermakers. Look, there's so many questions for Purdue. 32 transfers out, 27 transfers in. You can't honestly look at a team that went 1-11 that did not beat an FBS team last year, had that type of transfer movement, and expect them to be really anywhere other than 18th. Here's the weird thing about Purdue. You had good players on your team, like Dylan Thieneman transferred to Oregon, Max Clare transferred to Ohio State, Will Held transferred to Clemson, Cole Brevard transferred to Texas. Like, there were good individual players, yet somehow, for some reason, this thing under Ryan Walters just couldn't all come together. You've got Northwestern sitting there at number 17. Northwestern had 2 Big Ten wins last year, and they were against the other bottom 2 teams in the Big Ten in Purdue and Maryland. This is a team that's going to lose Xander Mueller at linebacker. They're going to lose their top corner in Theron Johnson. He transfers over to Oregon. I like their linebacker group, actually. Mac Uline was a all Big Ten linebacker for the Wildcats last year. He actually had more tackles than Xander Mueller last season. He's going to come back. They get Yanni Karlaftis, one of those transfers from Purdue who flashed at times. He's going to join this linebacker group. So I like that. They got some young players in the secondary. They lose some guys in the defensive line. They're going to lose their top 2 wide receivers from last season. It's Joseph Hyman time now in Evanston, Illinois. The big question for Northwestern, if they're maybe going to take steps up next season, Preston Stone. A couple of years back at SMU, yeah, he had a pretty good year. This year, it certainly didn't work out that way with Kevin Jennings taking over for the Mustangs and leading them to a college football playoff. If Preston Stone can be a little bit like Ben Bryant a couple of years back, and we'll see who steps up at wide receiver for Northwestern, maybe this is a team that could certainly surprise some people. But with the departures that they have, and maybe with what they have coming back, it's hard for me not to put them at number 17 on this list. Let's talk about the Maryland Terrapins at number 16. And I think I have them here because it's just Maryland looks like a different program post Taulia Tagovailoa. and that could possibly continue. They're going to lose Billy Edwards. He transfers over to Wisconsin. MJ Morris transfers out of this program as well, the quarterback position. They're going to get Justin Martin, who transfers over from UCLA. He had a decent first half in a big noon game against Penn State earlier this season. I think he's got some potential. We'll see what Mike Locksley can do with him. Maryland loses their top 2 wide receivers from last year in Ty Felton and Caden Prather. But what do we know about Maryland? They usually get wide receivers to kind of fill in the gaps. So we'll see if Octavian Smith, Shalik Knotts, and maybe some of these other guys can fill into those gaps as well. They're going to lose Roman Hemby, their running back of the last couple of years. He transfers over in conference to Indiana. They really like Nolan Ray. Nolan Ray put on a really good performance in the spring game and in the regular season last year. He's going to be expected to step up into that number 1 running back role. You look at this defense last year, and this just was not a very good defense. I kind of look around at what Maryland is adding right now, and I don't see a lot of plus type of improvements to kind of get them out of this spot. So that's kind of why I have the Terps, where I have them right now. Let's talk about the UCLA Bruins. UCLA is an interesting case study from last season. They went 5-7, which I think is pretty good considering they were in like a year 0 spot with Deshaun Foster last season. But here's the thing about those 5 wins. Every single one of those 5 wins, 2 of them were against 2 Mountain West teams, by the way. Hawaii at the beginning of the season, first game. Fresno State, the last game of the season. All 5 of those wins were by 7 points or less. So you could argue they were this close from maybe doing something like 3-9 last season. TJ Harden is gone at running back. You've got Ethan Garber's gone at quarterback. J. Michael Sturdivant transferred out at wide receiver. Carson Schlesinger, one of the top linebackers in the conference in the country, is going to be out of this program. Jay Toia is gone. Braylon Addison is gone in the secondary as well. Now, here's the thing I will say about UCLA. I think Deshaun Foster is doing a pretty good job in the transfer portal at trying to fill some of these gaps. But I'm just not certain how good that some of these players coming in, if they're going to be at the same level or continue to get better at those types of spots for the UCLA Bruins. I will say this about UCLA, and this is why I have them above teams like a Maryland. This is why I have them above teams like a Northwestern. They have that one thing about their team possibly for 2025 that could maybe be they could catch lightning in a bottle. They could be that spark, and it's the passing game. Joey Aguilar, who put up 2 really good seasons at Appalachian State the last couple of years, he transfers in, as well as his buddy from App State in Caden Robinson at wide receiver. Can this passing game be that spark? You've got Quasi Gilmer coming back. You've got Rico Flores coming back. I think the passing game has to be good. If UCLA wants to have a good year next year, they got to be on point. They got to be on point. When you lose your top 2 running backs, and then when you have what you have in this passing game, we'll see if that can really spark UCLA going forward. I've got the Rutgers Scarlet Knights at number 14. Look, we've seen Ethan Kaliakmanis. I don't think you're going to see a different Ethan Kaliakmanis in 2025, but here's the thing. You look at a new quarterback at UCLA coming from the G5 level. That nothing is guaranteed when it comes to that. You look at Maryland as a new quarterback, Northwestern as a new quarterback, Purdue as a new quarterback. Yes, we know Ethan Kaliakmanis is inconsistent at best, but you know what you got if you're Greg Schiano. And I think there's something to be said about that at Rutgers. Of course, they're lower on this list, maybe compared to where they've finished in the Big Ten the last few years, because you lose Kyle Monangai. Back-to-back 1,200-yard seasons rushing the football. But I will say this about the Scarlet Knights. Antoine Raymond, Jay-Sean Benjamin. I think that's a pretty good running back tandem, specifically Antoine Raymond. Will they be as good together than the singular performance the last couple of years of Kyle Monangai? I think they have to be, because I'm not sure if you can lean on Ethan Kaliakmanis to throw the football. That's a big factor for me offensively for Rutgers. You look at defensively, this was not like they had a lot of players returning last season, but production-wise, this wasn't a great defense. They were 17th in the Big Ten in total defense. Only Purdue gave up more yards per game on average than the Rutgers defense did last year. You lose a handful of starters on the defensive line and the secondary as well. Now, I like what they have coming back at linebacker. Dariel Jabome really stepped up in a big way this season. Mohamed Toure, of course, had that injury last year. I think that was during fall camp, so he's going to be able to come back next season. Really like that. They got to find a way to build around that. They got to find a way to be better. They have the second-ranked transfer portal class right now, currently in the Big Ten Conference. So I kind of like Rutgers above all of these teams, certainly right now. What I've seen from Greg Schiano and this Rutgers program in that chop mentality, they get guys that maybe aren't the highest recruited guys, certainly, but they get guys that fit their system and they find a way to develop them and make them into good players. They need that run game to be good in 2025. Otherwise, if you lean on Nathan and maybe some of this defense, I'm not sure if you're going to get that third consecutive bowl eligibility season that you're looking for in Piscataway, New Jersey. Let's head to the next segment of teams. This is number 10 through number 13. And let's start at number 13 and talk about the Michigan State Spartans. When you look at Michigan State as compared to some of those other teams, I think some of the players on this MSU team have higher ceilings. Like, here's what I like about Michigan State. I like a Aiden Childs with a full year starting quarterback under his belt, and then a spring coming up, and then a fall camp. We know the talent that Aiden Childs has. I think he just needs to work through some of these young quarterback type of growing pains and turning the football over like he did last season. Nick Marsh, that great freshman wide receiver, is going to come back. Jack Velling is going to be back, certainly at tight end as well. You got to figure something out in the run game. You're going to lose Nate Carter. You're going to lose K'Ron Lynch-Adams over there. Elijah Tautoliver, he transfers in from Sacramento State. He's going to be probably expected to be that guy. You've got Brandon Tullis as well in this running back room. But Tautoliver, 958 yards and 7 touchdowns last season. And I think another reason why I have Michigan State in this spot as compared to maybe being lower on this list, I trust Joe Rossi from a defensive perspective. The defensive coordinator, of course, there at Michigan State, what he did at Minnesota, building that defense year after year after year. They're certainly taking some losses with guys that are running out of eligibility or guys that are leaving the program via the transfer portal. But deep down, and I think there's some other parts of these rankings where you just got to trust your heart. You got to trust your gut. And I trust that Joe Rossi's going to have this defense improved for next season. Let's talk about the Wisconsin Badgers. I've got Wisconsin above Michigan State, and I think these are two very comparable programs here early in the 2025 offseason. I think there's just a little bit more talent in more spots at Wisconsin than there is at Michigan State. I mentioned the kind of those 3 players that I really like for Sparty, but I think Wisconsin just maybe has a little bit more depth across their entire football team right now. But here's what I will say about Wisconsin, being where they're at number 12 in a way too early Big Ten power rankings. These rankings have nothing to do with schedule. This is power rankings, this is roster, this is talent. But man, when I look at what this roster is, because that's what we're talking about, and when I peek in the corner of my eye and I look at the schedule, I'm not optimistic about Wisconsin football. I'm just not. But I am going to talk about this team, obviously, a little bit. So Billy Edwards transfers in. He was inconsistent last season. You look at the USC game, and he made some big plays, and he had a really good stat line. But then you look at that game on the road against Minnesota, and he turned the football over, and he turned the football over, and he turned the football over. Like, when I look at Wisconsin quarterbacks in the Luke Fickell era, when I look at Tanner Mordecai, when I look at Tyler Van Dyke for as little as we saw of him, and of course Brandon Locke, I'm not sure where Billy Edwards ranks in all of that. I'm not sure how much of an upgrade, if an upgrade he is over somebody like a Tyler Van Dyke, right? Like maybe Tanner Mordecai before him. I want to be optimistic and say Billy Edwards is going to fit into this thing, but my overall view of Wisconsin football is the hamster wheel just keeps on spinning. You see a lot of turnover and transfers year after year after year, and you keep on spinning on the wheel, and you can't get your feet down, and you can't gain any traction. And that's really what I feel. Now, when I look at Wisconsin for next season, They hire an offensive coordinator out with Phil Longo. Thank you. I'm sure that's what the Wisconsin fans are certainly saying right now. You bring in Jeff Grimes from Kansas, who's more invested and focused on the run game. Get back to Wisconsin football. I believe this run game is a huge part to the success of Badger football coming up this season. You need that run game to be good. You need Darian Dupree, who you saw last season. You need him to really be good. You need Dylan Jones. Those two guys were 4-star running backs in the same class. They were both true freshmen last season. Dylan Jones was actually higher rated, and I thought he had better high school tape than Darian Dupree did. So that needs to be your tandem. I don't think you can lean on Billy Edwards to throw the football down the field, and I don't think that's what Wisconsin wants to do. Right now, looking forward. They bring back a handful of guys in the offensive line. Like, they bring back Riley Molman, they bring back Joe Brunner, they bring back, I think it's Renfro in there at center, like 3 starters on the offensive line. So I think that's going to translate well into them being able to be able to run the football, but you need to take pressure off of Billy Edwards. You can't have him do everything. And I look at wide receiver for Wisconsin next season. They're going to lose Will Pauling. Vinny Anthony's good. They got Tretch Kekahuna coming back. Maybe he can have a breakthrough year in the slot. Bryson Green. And once again, I don't think they're going to put as much pressure on the passing game as they wanted to do with Phil Longo as the offensive coordinator. But still, I don't see a ton of plus players out on the outside to make consistent play after consistent play after consistent play. Maybe I just haven't seen it yet for the Wisconsin Badgers, certainly right now. And then they lost a lot of pieces on the defensive line. A lot of them went over to Illinois, by the way. Of course, we all know the story about Xavier Lucas. The reason Miami tampered is because he's a really good young player. Right? At a program like Miami, they put a ton of money into a player like that because he's good. And we saw him certainly show that. You're going to lose Hunter Wohler, the stalwart over there at safety. I look at this defense. They're bringing in a lot of transfers on the defensive line. A lot of times, some of them hit and some of them don't. Not all these guys are going to hit. This was the defensive line. That was certainly not the strength of the Wisconsin defense. And I'm not sure how it certainly looks right now. So Wisconsin is very much an uncertainty. Tanner Koisel is a good transfer at tight end. Then they bring in Jaden Ballard and Mark Hamper at wide receiver. Like, these are good things, but I don't know if it's enough to really gain traction as a roster to be higher than number 12. Like, when I now look forward to number 11, there's something about number 11 where I'm like, oh, this can give teams fits. What can give other better teams in the Big Ten fits for Wisconsin? If it's not the run game, I don't know what it is. Let's talk about that number 11. Let's talk about the Huskies up there in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle. I'll say this. I think there's a reason to be excited at the skill positions. I think there's really good players at the skill positions. If they can be explosive, that's a part of the Washington Huskies that could maybe give other teams fits. Let's talk about quarterback Damon Williams. You saw later on during the season, he got more playing time, especially during the bowl game, leading them back in a position to possibly win that game. They convert a 2-point conversion. They win that game in comeback fashion over the Louisville Cardinals. But you look at his mobility and you look at what he can do throwing the football down the field. I think Damon Williams is going to be a very exciting player to watch. I think he's going to be a very good quarterback in this conference right now. You're going to have Denzel Boston to throw the football to. He was really good last year. Amari Evans transfers over from Penn State. He was kind of that deep threat when the Nittany Lions did go deep last season. Jonah Coleman, a 1,000-yard running back, is returning to the Huskies next season. So there's a lot just with that group to be excited about. But then when you kind of branch off beyond that, that's why they're not in the top 10. Offensive line, you know, when you allow 10 sacks to anybody, that's not great, even though Oregon was a really good front last season. You look at the defensive line, they're losing a lot of guys up front up there. They're going to expect the Zach Durfees and maybe the Isaiah Wards to really step into those roles next season. Alfonso Tupatala, Carson Bruner are gone from the linebacking group. They've got a lot of departures out there in the secondary. Even though I like the combination at corner, Ephesians Prysock on one side to get Takario Davis from Arizona, so a couple of former Wildcats over there at the corner spot as well. So, but here's what I'm looking at for Washington, and maybe the formula of what is going to make them semi-successful and maybe give teams fits in the Big Ten next season. If this can be, and we've seen with Jed Fish year after year after year, this is a offense that continued to step up and get better and better and better. We saw that at Arizona, and of course they're wanting to see that over here with the Washington Huskies. But if this can be a top 5, top 6 type of offense in the Big Ten with the run game, with the pass game, with the weapons that they have, and then you get a middle-of-the-road Ryan Walters defense, which is maybe the realistic outlook for Washington. Ryan Walters in 2022 put together one of the nation's best defenses. I don't think you're going to see that in year number 1. But then he goes and becomes the head coach at Purdue, and they have one of the worst defenses. I don't think Washington is going to be at the bottom of the barrel defensively. I think if they have a formula where they're really good and explosive with those skill players that I talked about on offense, and if they have a middle of the road, look, you don't aim to be a middle of the road, but if you have a middle of the road defense in Seattle that can just make a couple of key stops during a football game, that could be a formula for maybe Washington to pull an upset or two in 2025. Let's talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers. They are at number 10, and maybe this is like fatigue for me. I'm kind of sick of backing up Nebraska and saying this about Nebraska. Oh, this is the year that Nebraska wins 8 games. This is the year that Nebraska wins 9 football games and they end up winning 5, or they end up winning 6 type of football games. And I think that goes into this a little bit. Because if you kind of back somebody up and you kind of give your brother money and you give your brother money and they end up just spending it on whatever, you're not apt to really give them any more money time after time after time. And I think that's maybe where I've gotten to. Maybe I'm building up walls a little bit with Nebraska a little bit. But when I really look into this roster, they had the most transfers in the Big Ten outside of Purdue. 26 players left this program. And when you have Matt Rule sometimes standing at the podium for Nebraska and saying, yeah, we don't have a lot of players depart this program because why would you leave Nebraska? And then you look at, I understand they lost Tony White at the defensive coordinator. I understand that goes into it a little bit. And of course, Dana Holgorsen taking over full time as the offensive coordinator. I understand all of those things factor into it. But when you're in year 3 and you're really trying to build this program up, that's not an ultra great sign, certainly for me as well. So I think that's a big reason why I have them where I have them. Like you look at some of the players that they lost, specifically on defense, you lose James Williams. He goes to Florida State with Tony White, Principal Uman Mielen, Jamari Butler, guys running out of eligibility, the Nash Hutmakers of the world, and the Ty Robinsons of the world. Like when you look at Nebraska, had success last year on defense. Colorado game, Ohio State game, some of these other games, it was when those two guys up front in the middle of the D-line were wreaking havoc. I'm not sure what to think of this defense here coming in, but I will say this about Nebraska. I do like some of the transfers that they're bringing in. Williams and Wary coming over from Missouri. Dane Key at wide receiver. Elijah Pritchett. He's had some off-the-field issues, but the former 5-star could be one of those bookends over there at offensive tackle. Dason McCullough, former Indiana Hoosier and Oklahoma Sooner. The linebacker, safety possibly a position in there as well. Like I like some of these transfers, but are they going to be able to fill as many of these gaps as Nebraska has? I'm not sure. Here's what I do know. I think Emmett Johnson, he needs to be that bell cow. He needs to be close that 1,000-yard back running the football. I'm still not overly sold on Nebraska as an offensive line, as a great offensive line team right now. And that goes with pass protection. That goes with Emmett Johnson's ability to run the football, certainly as well. So I kind of look at this team and maybe a little bit like Wisconsin, I see players leaving. I see players coming in. I'm not sure about the traction to get that to that 8-win level, to that 9-win level when I look at them compared to maybe some other teams in the Big Ten right now. From the double digits, let's move into the single digits and let's talk number 9, the Golden Gophers of Minnesota. I've got Minnesota above Nebraska. I'm sure that won't cause a Twitter reaction at all with these two fan bases. But when I look at Minnesota right now, the reason why I have them above Nebraska is you look at the players departing Nebraska, and then you look at what Minnesota was able to do in terms of retaining some of their better players, and I like the holes that they filled in the transfer portal as well. You look at Darius Taylor is coming back. They added depth at the running back position. Darius Taylor, he's a plus player, one of the best running backs certainly in the Big Ten Conference. You look at wide receiver. Yes, they're going to lose Daniel Jackson. They're going to lose Elijah Spencer, but you bring back Lemeke Brockington, and I like the pieces that they added at wide receiver. Logan Loya is a great slot receiver. Javon Tracy, I think, has some speed, can be a burner over the top. He comes over for a lot of production in the G5 at Miami of Ohio. How about Malachi Coleman coming over from Nebraska? He's a former 4-star, top 150 player. And if Minnesota can get some stuff out of him, I think he can be a really good player. I really always liked his length, and I always really liked his skill set. And we'll see if Minnesota can turn that into some good things, certainly as well. Now, they're going to lose 2 good offensive tackles. Phillip Daniels transfers over to Ohio State. Ariante Ursary is out of eligibility. So their offensive line is maybe a question that they need to be able to answer throughout this offseason as well. Even though the defensive line loses Danny Strigo, they lose Ja Joyner, there's a lot. They bring back almost everybody else. So you're going to see Anthony Smith. You're going to see Jackson Howard maybe step up into bigger roles, and I really like what they got there. They're going to lose Cody Lindenberg at linebacker, but I like Maverick Baranowski. I like Devin Williams at that spot. I like Coy Parrish, and I like Kerry Brown, a couple of young guys back there in the secondary that certainly made plays this last season. I like Minnesota. And once again, I go back to the transfer portal additions that they were very strategic with to be able to plug in. I would have maybe put Minnesota a little bit higher on this list if I was more certain about the quarterback position. Like if Max Brosmer, for example, had one more year of eligibility. They might have been a slot or 2 higher right now. But Drake Lindsley, transferring Zach Pyron, who's a former 4-star from Georgia Tech, hasn't gotten a lot of action at the college level. A lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position. And that's where maybe I'm a little bit skittish on Minnesota to put them higher on this list. Let's talk about number 8, and let's talk about the Trojans of USC. This is a team I'm not sure about for next season. This is a team, of course, we know they lost a lot in the transfer portal. This has been talked about a lot. The status of USC football, where is it? Especially that first recruiting class that came in under Lincoln Riley. A lot of those guys are gone. A lot of those 5-stars, a lot of those high 4-stars are not in LA anymore. I think the 2 biggest losses, Quentin Joyner transferring over to Texas Tech, Deuce Robinson transferring over to Florida State. I think I'd feel more optimistic if those 2 guys were in LA. Zachariah Brands transferring out, yes, he had a lot of stars to his name. He didn't really turn into the wide receiver, the route runner, the weapon that USC wanted him to be this past season. But here's what I do like about USC. Okay, I'm going to take that negative and maybe turn it into a positive. I think it has opened up what I think a lot of USC fans and what a lot of us, I think, really figured out over this last season. Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon, I think, could be one of, if not the best wide receiver tandem in the Big Ten next season. I think both of those guys really proved as this season went along that, hey, we need to get the football more. We need to be the guys that are getting our hands on the football. There's going to be a little bit of a drop-off at wide receiver after those 2 guys next season. So if one or both of these guys aren't having a great game next year, that's where maybe USC could, not saying they will, we got a long way to go, but they could get in a little bit of trouble throwing the football. And I am not confident at quarterback. I think USC would be a spot, maybe 2 higher if they had a really good quarterback. But Jaden Mayava, inconsistencies, turning the football over. You got Husan Longstreet, who's a really promising true freshman, but those last 2 words, a true freshman. I kind of feel strongly that once we get into this season a little bit, and once you see Mayava game 4, game 5, game 6, I think you could see USC take the Longstreet once you get into the middle of the season. That would not surprise me at all in and of the slightest. I think this defense is going to continue to get better. This is kind of a little weird saying this. I think USC is turning into a little bit of a developmental program. USC right now, I'm not saying that this is going to be the case 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever years from now, but right now, they can't spend money and they cannot recruit with the Ohio States, with the Oregons, with the Michigans, with some of the top teams in the Big Ten and all of college football like they used to. This was a program at one time where you could draw an 80-mile circle around the Coliseum and say, recruit everybody in this area and we're going to be able to win a championship in every single year. That just doesn't exist anymore. That's not the world that's out there. And then you got teams from the SEC that are coming into Southern California and recruiting that area as well. So USC has kind of taken some of these players and they've built together a defensive staff that has a lot of former NFL guys that are going to look to develop these defensive players into NFL guys because they know what it takes to be able to get to that level. And I look at the defense for next season, I think it's going to continue to get better and better and better. They took a really big jump this past season. I think they can take another jump next season with Danton Lynn, the defensive coordinator. We know about Hendy, the defensive line coach, Rob Ryan coming in at the linebackers. Like, we know this defensive staff. Certainly by now, Braylon Shelby, another year of Cam Fountain, Devin Tompkins, Anthony Lucas was really good before he got injured last season. The 5-star Thanos that is Jakeem Stewart, a couple of SEC transfers, big bodies in Keyshawn Silver and Jamal Jarrett. I feel good about the defensive line. I feel good about the front seven. You're going to have Eric Gentry at linebacker coming back. You're going to have Kamari Ramsey at safety coming back. I think there's some stuff to look forward to defensively for USC, but with how unsure I am at quarterback, we'll see if Eli Sanders, a transfer coming in from New Mexico, maybe him and Brian Jackson can be something in the running back room. There are some things that I'm pretty unsure of right now for USC. I think this team could go in a multitude of directions for next year. But for as unsure as I feel about USC, I've got Iowa above them because I just feel sure about what I'm going to get. I know what I'm going to get out of the Iowa Hawkeyes. I think Iowa is making an upgrade at the quarterback position with South Dakota State transfer Mark Gronowski. This quarterback situation, although it's not a complete Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste from Rutgers last season, there is some comparisons. In the winter portal period, you bring in Mark Gronowski, kind of like they brought in Ethan Kaliak-Manis last year. You had an incumbent, Gavin Wimsatt at Rutgers, Brendan Sullivan at Iowa, and you're going to have this quarterback battle. And I say this a lot on this channel. A lot of other people say this. You brought in this guy for a reason. You brought in Mark Gronowski for a reason. And you look at Brendan Sullivan, yeah, he was okay, a couple of years back at Northwestern, subbing in for Ben Bryant. You kind of look at what he did this year, the bowl game, as that game really went on, they didn't really provide much of a spark. I know you can't put that 100% on Brendan Sullivan when you don't really have a lot of weapons at Iowa in terms of the receiving game, but I think that this is going to be a situation where Mark is going to win this job in the spring, and I think you're going to see Brendan transfer out of this program also in the spring. So I like what I got at quarterback, upgrading that position. Cade McNamara is playing at freaking East Tennessee State right now. So if that doesn't tell you anything, I don't know what does. The big question for Iowa, you lose a 1,500-yard back, one of the best backs in college football, in Caleb Johnson. Can Kamari Moulton and Jazz Patterson be as good combined than the singular performance of Caleb Johnson last year? They bring back some key players on the offensive line, and I think the players that are going to fill those holes of departing players in the O-line are going to be pretty solid as well. Like, usually I feel good about offensive line and I feel good about defense for the University of Iowa. And I kind of feel that way. I think that this is going to be a good run game. Can it be a great run game? It has the ability to. I'm just not sure if I'm ready to absolutely guarantee that certainly right now. But keep in mind, Kamari Moulton was RB1 on the depth chart when this thing started last season. I like how downhill Jazz Patterson has run throughout his Iowa career. So I think there's good things there. And then you just trust a Phil Parker defense. You just trust it. You know what you're going to get. You know how Iowa does these things. They don't recruit. I mean, even though Xavier Wampa comes back and he was a 5-star. But most of the time, I should say, they don't recruit these high 4 stars and 5-star type of talent. They find guys that fit their system and they develop them over time, and they turn into NFL type of players. But you look at Iowa defensively, I look at the defensive line. Aaron Graves is going to be back. Ethan Hurkett is going to be back. Max Llewellyn is going to be back there. I look at the secondary. Xavier Wampa, Deshaun Lee, TJ Hall, John Nestor. God, the next maybe group of guys at Iowa are going to be back. They're going to lose Quinn Schulte. They're going to lose Jamari Harris. They're going to lose Sebastian Castro out of that room. But I don't know. I just got this gut feeling that Iowa is going to be fine defensively. I think their run game might not be as good as last season, but it's still going to be really good when you compare it to the rest of the Big Ten. An upgraded quarterback, I've got Iowa number 7 over the likes of USC and Minnesota. Let's talk about the Indiana Hoosiers, folks. IU, Kurt Cignetti. If you didn't like him last year, well, I got bad news for you. He ain't going anywhere. The Indiana Hoosiers ain't going anywhere. So you lose Curtis Rourke, you bring in Fernando Mendoza, one of the best quarterbacks in the transfer portal. You lose what you lost at running back. You got Roman Hemby coming in from Maryland, and Kalon Black returns as well. I think that's going to be a pretty good running back combination, filling in for the likes of Justice Ellison, who departs. And then when you look what's coming back at wide receiver, their top guy, Elijah Surratt, is going to be back. Omar Cooper is going to be back. You look at the defensive side of the football. Mikhail Kamara was one of the Big Ten's best pass rushers, last year. Aiden Fisher at linebacker, D'Angelo Pons, they've got good players, and they're dipping into the transfer portal to fill in some of these gaps. I like what Indiana's team looks like. They're going to be facing a tougher schedule in 2025 than they did in 2024. But this is a team I'm very confident in, with Indiana at number 6 as compared to the 3 other teams on this in this section, certainly. Certainly a lot of depth in the Big Ten, and this group right here really illustrates that. But now it's time to get in to maybe some playoff contenders and reveal my top 5. There it is. Let's talk about it. Everybody's talking about Illinois. On 3, I think, had them as a top 10 team in college football, and they're way too early. Top 25. There's way too early top 25s that have them in the top 15 and all of that. This is a team with a lot of expectations. And this is a team that's bringing back as much experience as anybody in the Big Ten and as anybody in college football. When you win 10 games, maybe the quietest 10-win season in the history of college football, when you do that and you bring back the talent that they do, and I'm going to get to that when I talk about number 1, experience. Experience is big now in college football. There's a lot of movement that goes along. If you can kind of run it back multiple years with the same guys and build that chemistry and build that camaraderie, that says a lot. Luke Altmaier, Gabe Akers, J.C. Davis, Xavier Scott, just to list a few of guys and impact players that are coming back. Aaron Henry, we know, the defensive coordinator for Illinois, of course, a former Wisconsin defensive back under Brett Bielema when he was the head coach in Madison. I think this season you could see really the crown jewel of what Aaron is putting together, specifically in the secondary. I think that this secondary could be, I know Sidney Brown playing football for the Philadelphia Eagles. I know Devin Witherspoon was a high draft pick, certainly. But I think this secondary could rival what they had in 2022. And I tell you what, man, if Caden Fagan can stay healthy, he can be a 1,000-yard back. But the good news for Illinois is you've got depth in that room. Now, the big question for the Illini, Pat Bryant leaving, Zachary Franklin leaving. You're going to need some of these other guys to step up. The Malik Elzies, the Hank Beatties, and they bring in a couple of transfers as well. What is their wide receiver room going to look like next year? But when you bring back as much experience as you do, and you have a coach that I trust maybe more than anybody in Brett Bielema, Illinois is going to have a really good team next year. They're going to have high expectations in Champaign. We're not used to saying that, but it's going to happen. They're going to sell out their stadium. There's going to be a lot of excitement for Illinois. I've got them at number 5 in my way too early Big Ten Power rankings. Let's talk about number 4, the Michigan Wolverines. Look, I think Jim Harbaugh leaving and J.J. McCarthy leaving when they did put Michigan in a little bit of a tough spot to be able to rebound. But I think last year is the bridge to an improved season for the Michigan Wolverines. When I look at this team, I know what they lose. I know losing Colston Loveland and Will Johnson and Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, these are going to be players that are going to be drafted high, first-round draft picks from this team, some of those guys. But I look at what's returning for Michigan this year, and I think this is a pretty good football team. Mikey Keene, an experienced quarterback. I think you could see a similar thing at Michigan that I talked about at USC before. I don't know if Mikey Keene's going to finish the season. I think by the time maybe Bryce Underwood, game 5, game 6, and really learns the playbook, get his feet wet, there's a point in time where you can't deny that talent. When he kind of gets in and he's been on campus for a little bit, and like I said, he learns some things, there's going to be a time where Mikey Keene's ceiling is going to be Mikey Keene's ceiling. And maybe Michigan is going to want a little bit more, and that's when we see Bryce Underwood. Whoever is at quarterback in whichever game, they're going to have a really good run game to lean on. Justice Haynes coming in from Alabama, and they really love Jordan Marshall. You saw what Jordan Marshall did in the bowl game. I think this is a fantastic run game. We'll see if the offensive line can pave the way. Donovan McCulley, Anthony Simpson, both transferring in. I think they can give this passing game a boost from the wide receiver position as well. And I really like the defense. I like the defense yet again. Defensive line, Derek Moore running it back one more year. TJ Guy, Rayshawn Benny, Cameron Brandt. All these guys look good in that bowl victory against Alabama. There were some people, myself maybe included, that says, well, no Kenny Grant, no Mason Graham. How is this defensive line going to hold up? Yeah, they held up pretty darn good against the Alabama Crimson Tide down there in Tampa in that bowl game as well. And then they went out and they got Damon Payne from Alabama. I think he's probably going to be a starting defensive lineman. Trey Williams as well from Clemson. So I feel really good about the Michigan defensive line right now. Jayshon Barham will be back. Ernest Hausman. Don't forget about Rod Moore. Rod Moore was a big part of this defense on the field, obviously, but in the locker room he was a great leader of this team. Of course, he made that great interception during that 2023 national championship season against Ohio State. Having him back, I think, is going to do a lot to bring this secondary together and to make this secondary better than it was last season. I think Michigan's got a really good football team next season. Do they have a team that can be a Big Ten championship or a national title and make a playoff run? I don't know if I would say that quite yet, but that's where I get into these top 3. I think there's a line between number 4 and number 3. These are the teams that can make college football playoff runs, Big Ten championship runs, and national championship type of runs. Let's start first with the Ducks up there in the Pacific Northwest in the state of Oregon. There's a lot to be excited about because a lot of people in Duck Country are saying, all right, yeah, 2025, we're going to be good again, and maybe we can make a run. But a lot of people are looking at 2026 to maybe turn that O into a 1 as far as national championships are concerned. Dante Moore, man, he's a talented kid. You look even back to his UCLA tape. True freshmen go through a lot of highs and lows, especially if they're thrown into the fire right away. You saw some good things from Dante. You saw some not good things from Dante. But to be able to sit behind Dylan Gabriel, learn with Will Stein over the course of the season, and then you have guys like Tez Johnson say, yeah, he's going to be a Heisman finalist or could be a Heisman finalist next year. You look at Trayshawn Holden and some of these other guys leaving that say, you guys got a good one, certainly at quarterback. And I think Dante Moore is going to be good just because of what he has around him. Evan Stewart returns at wide receiver. DeCorian Moore, the great freshman. Can he have the same impact as Jeremiah Smith? Of course, they're two completely different body types and talent, but production-wise, I have a good feeling. DeCorian Moore is going to be able, I feel good about Evan Stewart. I feel good about DeCorian Moore at wide receiver, that they're going to give Dante Moore a lot of openings to throw the football down the field, certainly. Who's going to step in as that other wide receiver spot? That's a big question, certainly for them. I like what they've done in the offensive line, bringing in Emmanuel Pregnon. Of course, you bring back Iapani Lalaolu, Pancho at center, Dave Iuli or Matthew Bedford at the other guard. Like, there's good players up front on the O-line. Kenyon Sadiq might be one of the Big Ten's best tight ends next season. You look at defense, Bryce Betcher is coming back at linebacker. Devin Jackson is back at linebacker. Mateo Uyunglele is back there as well. They get Dylan Thieneman and Theron Johnson in the secondary. Just keep an eye on Oregon. This is a team where if all of these pieces clicks, and then you've got Makai Hughes, back-to-back 1,200-yard seasons at Tulane, combined with Noah Whittington in the backfield. If all of these pieces click, this could be a team that could make another run. Number 2, I've got the Buckeyes of Ohio State. Now, Ohio State, they got a lot to replace, and I think that's a big reason why I do not have them number 1 on this list, is because there are some spots on their team where you have some younger players coming in, and you're just not sure how good they're going to be. We got a feeling they're going to be good. Can they be great? Can they be elite? Those are questions. Those questions need to be answered. But when you have Jeremiah Smith at wide receiver, and when you have Caleb Downs, those are 2 that might be the best offensive player and the best defensive player coming back in college football next season. As long as you have those 2 guys, you're going to be pretty solid. You're going to be pretty good. But when you look at the rest of like Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, like wide receiver, you're going to have that box checked. What about the run game? You're not going to have TreVeyon Henderson. You're not going to have Quinshon Judkins. You bring in C.J. Donaldson as a transfer. I don't think the run game is going to be as good at Ohio State next season. We'll see. Once again, we come back to Julian Sayin at quarterback. There's a lot of hype right now that's saying, he's this good, he's that good, but we got to see it. We just don't know first year starting quarterback how it's all going to pan out. You look at the defensive side. Everybody's gone on the defensive line. The defensive line was a huge part to the defensive success and the overall team success of the Buckeyes this past season. How good are they going to be this season, having a bunch of new guys up front and a new defensive coordinator? That's a whole different thing that we got to talk about as well. Davison Igbinosun is going to be back in the secondary as well. I think Ohio State is going to be a little bit more human this next season, but I certainly still think that they have the talent to be in the conversation for the playoff, be in the conversation for the Big Ten championship, and maybe be in the conversation for the national championship as well. All right, we've got the Nittany Lions of Penn State number 1 because, man, we see it year after year after year now. They are carbon copies, almost, of what we saw in 2023 with Michigan, of what we saw in 2024 with Ohio State. Now we're seeing it in 2025. All the chips are being pushed to the center of the 2025 table for the Penn State Nittany Lions. Jim Knowles coming in as the defensive coordinator. Drew Aller, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, Denai Dennis Sutton, all of these guys, experience coming back. It's been the blueprint to national championship success over the last few seasons. Guys that have been around James Franklin, guys that have been around this program for multiple years, has shown that it is tremendously important to making that run for a national championship. The experience and everybody running it back with a clear purpose is a big reason why I have them at number 1 in my way too early power rankings in the Big Ten. I think Drew Aller could be one of the best quarterbacks in college football, maybe the best quarterback in the Big Ten. I think that run game is going to be just insanely difficult to stop. I think this team is more in the mold of 2023 Michigan, where they're going to try to smash and run the football, and Drew Aller is going to beat you when he has to. A lot like Drew Aller and J.J. McCarthy, I can see some similarities there, how both of these offenses might be used, how they did in 2023 versus how Drew will be used in 2025. But, man, Penn State, they got a lot coming back. They got to get better at wide receiver. They lose Trey Wallace. They lose Amari Evans to the portal. They bring in some transfer wide receivers. Will they be better? I'm not sure, but they certainly have to be, I think, if Penn State is going to win a national championship next season. Losing Tyler Warren is going to be big, but they really like their young tight end, Luke Reynolds, in there as well. But, man, it is going to be a fun offseason to kind of break this all down, wrap it all up, final power rankings with everybody involved, all the colors, all the teams. When I look at teams like a USC, Minnesota, Nebraska, Washington, like at number 11, I think there's going to be a lot of depth in the Big Ten, certainly next season. Those are my thoughts on the matter. What about you? I'm sure not everybody agrees. In fact, I 100% guarantee that not everybody agrees. Hit me with your way too early Big Ten power rankings in the comments below, and let's chat about it. This is a fun exercise to get the discussion started about the 2025 Big Ten season. Whew! I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.